GamingBolt presents 15 worst horror games that kept you up at night with disappointment instead of fear. Making a horror game is tough. There have been some true classics in the genre, but also more than a few flops. Some are actually so bad at scaring the player that you could mistake them for comedies rather than horror games. Here are 15 of the worst horror games that kept you up at night with disappointment instead of fear.
Oh, Amy, everything is going to be okay. I promise.
Amy. More of an escort mission than a full game. It's not fun having to constantly look after another character. This makes Amy a game that is horribly frustrating. You quickly learn to hate every character that's introduced to you, and instead of fearing whatever lurks in the shadows, you just want to plow through them and get to the end of the game. The Letter. Released on the Wii U as an exclusive indie title, The Letter has a very simple premise. You wander around a house and collect letters. This overly simple idea makes things incredibly boring. The game never gains momentum and becomes a letter-collecting simulator set in a dingy house. Night Trap. One of the original bad horror games, Night Trap comes from a time when FMV games were all the rage and controlling real actors was the newest form of full immersion. It's too bad that the game is horribly acted, poorly controlled, and incredibly difficult to boot.
We're in this huge house with all your friends. We have telephones, we have a car, your parents are gone, and you say, so?
Come on, Sarah, what's the first thing you think of?
Party!
The result is a unique game that is simultaneously frightening and funny, cementing itself as a cult classic, but no thanks to any great game design. Michigan, Report from Hell. Like the title says, this game is reporting straight from hell, showing everybody how to make a horror game come off more as a comedy than anything else. While wandering through bland areas in first person, you'd think that looking through the lens of your camcorder would heighten the player's fear, but instead it just makes the entire experience seem like a bad 90s music video. Carrier. Carrier is a Resident Evil style game, but it's lacking all of the charm and thrills. Hunting down terrorists just isn't as scary as fighting back zombies. It doesn't help that the game simply feels really flat. Even its supposedly terrifying monsters are nothing more than soldiers with teeth. Not exactly something that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The Walking Dead Survival Instinct. Telltale's Walking Dead game is a fantastic representation of the world of the comic. The show does a great job in its own right, but any video games based on the television property seem to lack a certain something.
What the hell are you doing? What's it look like I'm doing? I'm saving the damn day.
The Walking Dead Survival Instinct is a perfect example. It's devoid of any depth, and the AI is so dumb you would think that the zombies don't even like human flesh. This results in a game that's more comical in its flaws, rather than being truly terrifying. Resident Evil Survivor. It turns out that Resident Evil 7 wasn't the first time the series went first person. Resident Evil Survivor was a clunky attempt at the idea, mixing less than responsive combat with even less responsive controls. It also keeps the hilarious writing and voice acting of early RE games, adding to its ridiculousness. Just skip this one if you can. There are plenty of other Resident Evil games on the market for you to jump into that'll actually have you falling out of your chair from fright. Black Soul. Haunted houses are usually one of the scariest things that you can put in a video game, but Black Soul managed to mess this up. All you end up doing for the majority of the game is walking around a house solving simple puzzles and wishing the protagonist could walk a little bit faster. Sure, it builds tension, but it doesn't keep your attention.
Stay right where you are. Mr. President!
Resident Evil 6. Once Resident Evil 5 led the series down the path to action, it decided to steer into the skid. There were 3 campaigns to choose from, one trying to recreate the series' horror roots, while others relied more on the action itself. Even the horror aspects fall flat though, resulting in the worst numbered entry in the franchise. Friday the 13th on NES. The pixels of the NES couldn't recreate Friday the 13th in all its gory glory, so instead it had a sprite of Jason slowly chopping his way across the screen, trying to hunt down the innocent teens who wandered into his 2D territory. It isn't faithful to the film at all, doing its best to work as a standalone title that's barely connected to the movie. Lifeline for PS2. Unique control techniques don't always work out. More often than not, they're a hindrance, and Lifeline is a perfect example of how voice controls should not be used to maneuver characters. Add this to a horror game, and you'll find yourself trying to talk to the game through gritted teeth. It's a real chore to beat the entire game, let alone the first section. Alone in the Dark 2008. It's unfortunate that the 2008 of Alone in the Dark couldn't live up to the high pedigree of the series. Like many other horror remakes, it just couldn't recapture the magic, instead doing all it could to fit as many genre tropes as it could into one game. But it didn't do any of them well, putting a temporary end to the series after it turned it into a joke.
Your legs are attached to an elevator, and your arms to the ceiling. Balance the numbers using as few moves as possible. If you fail, the elevator will fall.
Saw 2: Flesh and Blood. Saw is one of the most exciting horror series of the past 20 years, with each new film thinking up strange new ways for people to be decapitated and horribly disfigured. The game is less of a terrifying struggle to survive, and more of a slog through dingy rooms, with a lot of quick-time events to break up the monotony. Shellshock 2: Blood Trails. Shellshock 2 ramps up the horror of the Vietnam War, which should be an incredibly effective way to fill a player with fear. The result, however, was a shallow, overly dramatic shooter that was unremarkable in almost every way. It isn't scary, it's just another first-person shooter.
Shit.
Resident Evil: Operation Raccoon City. For a series that kicked off the survival horror genre, Resident Evil: Operation Raccoon City does not live up to the legacy at all. Following in the footsteps of some of the series' more recent entries, it's more of an action game than anything. Players will pump zombies full of lead rather than shying away from them.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.